Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Laura Prell, and I am American Homebuilder of West Africa's Digital Marketing Manager. So just a few housekeeping things I want to go over before we get started. If you have any questions, I ask that instead of raising your hand or typing in the chat, that you please type them in the Q&A box of the webinar. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to type any questions you have as you think of them into that Q&A box. We're recording this webinar and I'll be sending it out to everyone, so you'll all get a copy of it afterwards. And then as the digital marketing manager, I have to plug all of our social media. So please, if you aren't already, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And the handles for all of those accounts are on that first slide. And if you post or tweet about the webinar, please tag us. Nothing makes me happier than when I get notifications that we've been tagged. So for now, I'm excited to introduce Jonathan Halloran, the CEO and co-founder of American Homebuilders of West Africa. AHWA started in Guinea in 2014, but was an idea that Jonathan had long before that. Today, he's going to give you all a background on AHWA, talk a bit about why West Africa is such an exciting market, and also look at some case studies of a few successful businesses in West Africa. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
Great. Thanks, Laura. It is great to be here. I know a lot of people are stuck at home and have been for some time. And whether you're here in the US, I'm in Chicago right now, or you're in Africa, or you're in Europe, or wherever you are, we decided that we wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. And at this time, one is that HWA started over 6 years ago, and we have gotten help from people that I could never count. And the number of people who've helped us in so many ways along the way has been just unbelievable. And we felt like it was important that we were ready to give back to the community as well. So mostly we just want to do this to give a little something back. We know there's a lot of interest. And over the last 6 or 7 years, I've talked to so many people who have talked about how they'd like to start a business, or how they saw what we did and they were inspired. And so we'd like to share everything that we know about what we've learned and what we've seen others do and how others have been successful. So that's kind of the number one thing. We'd also like to encourage investment in West Africa because we think it's a great market. Obviously, West Africa is not a single market. There's lots of markets in West Africa, but we think it's a really exciting place right now. And the more money that comes into the region, the better off everyone is. So we are really excited, and we want to encourage people to take their dreams and turn them into reality as we've been able to. And finally, I have to just say we love talking about our business, and it's been a labor of love for the last 6.5 years, and it's always fun to kind of talk about it. I really do encourage you to ask some questions too. And as Laura said, she'll be kind of moderating the Q&A. And we will have lots of time at the end. The presentation is nowhere near an hour. Our hope is that we'll get lots of questions and we can, discuss those things. And some of them we can talk about right now. Obviously, I'm just one person. I have the experience that I've had and that my colleagues have had and that we've shared, and lots of people who we've worked with in the region and learned about. But we know that all of you have lots of experience too, and we'd love to hear about that. So comments are welcome, of course, too. All right, so let's get started. Our agenda for today, and I think Laura shared this in the invitation. We're going to talk a little bit about ourselves and our background and kind of where we came from. The fun part is why West Africa is so exciting and what makes it exciting, and pitfalls and things that we've seen, mistakes we've made, mistakes we've seen other people make, and hopefully some ways to avoid them. One of the questions that people ask me all the time is, where do you find the money to get started? And we'll talk about where financing can come from and some tips and tricks around that. Some case studies of some businesses that we've seen start and be successful. And then we'll kind of wrap it up and take your questions. So let's talk about us first. And some of you know us, some of you don't. American Homebuilders of West Africa was started by a diasporan from Guinea and 2 Peace Corps volunteers, of which I am one of those 2, in 2014. And what we were trying to address was the regional housing shortfall, depending on who you ask, there's at least 20 million units of housing that are necessary in the region. And that number is often quoted as growing by over 1 million units a year. So to put that in context, all at the peak of home building in the United States, there were 1.3 million new housing units being built a year. So if you think about West Africa as a region, you know, obviously when you're including Nigeria in there, it makes it so much bigger, but you know, a population not dissimilar to the United States, and the deficit there is growing by 1 million units a year, which is about what the maximum capacity of the US industry was at its peak. It's much lower than that now. So the approach of, and that's why we think it's a great market and an exciting market. Our approach is to try to bring production home building techniques to West Africa. So if you look at the names that you see in the United States and in Europe, these would be different names, but you'd see the similar approach. Big housing developers like Lennar and Pulte and Toll Brothers. That's what we are, and that's where we're going. Our goal is to build, you know, between 10 and 50,000 units annually, and that kind of depends on how the market plays out for us. We currently have 2 developments going in Guinea. Or, I'm sorry, one of our developments in Guinea is complete. One is ongoing, and we're right now buying some new land to start a 3rd one. We have 2 developments going on in Sierra Leone. They're both ongoing. And we've raised over $1.5 million of startup capital. We're now generating cash flow and profit. And we have had about $1.8 million in sales in 2018, with about 60% annual growth, give or take, which we hope to accelerate in the next couple of years. So anyway, that's, you know, if you want to ask why is this guy talking to me? That's not the biggest success story in West African history by any means, but I can tell you that I've had hundreds of people talk to me over the course of the last couple of years and say, you're still around? So we are still around, we're growing, and it's a really exciting time for us. And despite everything that's going on in the world right now, we continue. We have 2 new starts this week, and we're being really careful about how we're building right now and how we're addressing social distancing on our job sites and all of those things that every other business is doing, but we are continuing to grow through this crisis. So let's talk a little bit about the opportunity in the market in West Africa. All of you are here because you believe in the market. Many of the people who are on this call are either in West Africa or are diasporans who are probably thinking that they might like to go back there at some point and do something and invest. And I think, as Laura mentioned, I had this dream for over 25 years before we started this business. And I think that for just about every member of the diaspora, there's a dream about starting a business in West Africa, whether that's in Guinea or Sierra Leone, the markets we're in, or any of the other markets there. So what's really incredible is that it is a wide open place. Someone once said, I heard this quote, that America has competition and Africa has complexity. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at things, because there isn't a lot of competition in most markets in West Africa. Maybe if it comes to selling, you know, Omo powder in the market, there's a lot of competition. But in so many other places, the needs for goods and services is so much higher than you would see in a Western market. The margins can be a lot higher as a result. The demand for goods, that high quality goods and services, is almost insatiable. There is an incredibly high demand because there is so little supply. And a lot of people talk about the bottom of the pyramid, and they talk about, you know, the very high end of the market. And the truth is, there's opportunities at the top, there's opportunities at the bottom, there's opportunities in between. There are just a lot of different places. There's many leapfrogging opportunities that you'll hear about. FinTech in West Africa is just incredibly hot right now. Personally, sounds like a bubble to me, but you know, I'm not in FinTech, so I don't really know. But that's one of the places that you'll see lots of investment dollars going in. Obviously, the story of internet connectivity is one that has changed the dynamics of investment. My business partner and I often say that we could never have done this business if we had started 10 years earlier, just because of the lack of 3G and now 4G internet, which enables so many things in our business to work. Software as a service doesn't work without internet, and software as a service is so critical to so much we do in our business. You'll hear narratives about the rising cost in East Asia and things like textiles moving to places like Ethiopia. We think East Asia's cost issue is West Africa's opportunity. So there's lots you can read on this slide. I don't need to read it. I think everyone, I'm preaching to the choir here. There's nothing but opportunities in West Africa. So challenges that you'll face, and I think these are not ones that that would be unknown to most of the people who are here today. But I think it's worth talking about them because every time you think about a challenge, and we've had to do this so much over the last 6 years, when we run into a challenge, we have to try to figure out what's the flip side and how do you turn that around and make that challenge into your opportunity. And I know that sounds cliche, but I think this is more critical in this market. And for me as a Westerner going into the African market or West African market, it was really, really important for me to not think about, oh, well, that's not how I'm used to seeing it done, but to look at every one of those challenges as an opportunity. So I think all of you know that infrastructure is lacking. Look, there's places like Abidjan and Dakar and Accra that have infrastructure. Most of West Africa is lacking in infrastructure in so many different ways. So it's not even worth kind of starting to go talk about electricity and water and roads and all the things that are missing. I mentioned the demand for goods and services. The reason for that is often that you just can't buy it at any price. So it doesn't matter what price you're willing to pay. Sometimes there's not a product you can buy and not a service that you can buy that would meet an international standard. And in our business, we constantly talk about international standards, and because it's so important for the mentality of the team. I won't even start to talk about it's not done like that here. That's a challenge in every market. In West Africa, I think is a gigantic challenge. But to me, the most important thing to think about in West Africa and what makes it so many things about doing business there are the same to me as the rest of my 30-year career in business. I don't find things that different. People challenges are not that different. Business challenges are not that different. But what is different in my mind and makes it different from just about every other market I've been in is the lack of societal trust and social capital. So what I mean by that is if you think about anyone who lives in the West and thinks about going online on Amazon and ordering toilet paper, topic of the day, right? And you're pretty confident that you swipe your credit card as you check out and that toilet paper will show up at your house in 3 days or whatever, or sometimes in 24 hours. And you don't worry that they're not going to deliver and they're just going to take your money. This is the lack of societal trust that we found, and is frankly the foundation of our business, is trust. That's what we're all about, is delivering on promises and not failing to keep our promises is the critical factor in, I think, understanding the market. Now, as I said, there's a lot of wisdom listening in here, and I welcome people to debate me on that point. But I do think that that's kind of, to me, is the crux of the problem to solve in a lot of businesses in Africa or in West Africa. I'm very reluctant to talk about Africa because I've traveled in North Africa. I know a bit of West Africa, but I don't know Africa. I've never set foot in East Africa or Southern Africa. And I think we all have to be careful about making generalizations about any market in Africa or even in West Africa. Lagos is not Abidjan, is not Accra, is not Kumasi. Cities are different, countries are different, ethnicities are different. There's lots of different things. So one of the most important things I wanted to share today, other than we're going to get to some case studies, because I think it's always great to hear about people who've succeeded, is where are the mistakes that we see people making and how do they lead to kind of repeated failures? And I just talked to somebody, a member of the diaspora, about this, who had tried to build his house in Cote d'Ivoire and had paid a very large deposit, and then his money got eaten up. He actually had this happen twice, and his house didn't get built either time. He just completely lost his money. And the comment he made to me was, he said, I think this is like that French hangover where they feel this need to hire a CEO, a CFO, a chief marketing officer, a chief product officer, and all of these high overhead positions before they really do anything. And I would say that that is probably the bane of many, many businesses in West Africa that we've seen, is having too much overhead. I do talk about not investing in people as well, thinking, oh, we need expats to do this. Well, I'm a firm believer that what we need in West Africa is helping develop the talent that's there. And that's been the crux of our business plan, or one of the cruxes of our business plan. Not having enough capital is obviously an issue. Picking the wrong partners, we could talk for hours on that topic. My rule of thumb is anybody who says I can introduce you to a minister is somebody I don't want to talk to. And, you know, I talked a little bit on the last slide about government and the role of government. And our attitude is very much to, we're going to follow all the laws, we're going to pay all our taxes, but we don't want to have too close of a relationship with any governments, because we're not going to rely on them. And I think that can be, you know, kind of an issue. One of the common mistakes we see is people taking a model that worked in some other market. And I'll give you an example of one that even worked in Accra, but didn't work in Conakry, was a housing development approach. And anytime you're kind of trying to take that model and move it from one place to another, you really have to be extremely careful with that. I just told you that I want to be the Toll Brothers or the Pulte of West Africa. So I'm talking about taking a model and putting it there. And yet that model is extremely adapted to the market. We are not doing things the way that people do it in Philadelphia or Chicago in a lot of ways. And I think that's probably one of the biggest pitfalls. I'm going to talk about the brown bag in a second, so I won't mention that here, but that's definitely a no-no and a big mistake, I think. And I talked about expats versus local training and local people. I will say, to me, you know, I said societal trust is really important to what we're doing. It's easy to sum up. And I don't think this is any different in West Africa than anywhere else. If you do not understand your customers intimately and their needs and what they want and what they aspire to and all the things that are important to them, it is really hard to deliver something that they're going to buy and they're going to value. And that's easy to say. It's very difficult to do, because you have to be able to take your own lenses off and try and look at the world through their lenses. And sometimes the thing that they want is just to feel good about what they're doing. And it isn't actually a product, it's a feeling. And so in every industry, it's different. If you're selling soap powder, that's a lot different than selling houses like we do. But if you're not starting with the customer, and this is a mistake we see over and over and over, is people not thinking about their customer when they start their business. And I'm happy to take questions on that to think about it a little more. So what's our experience from both our personal experience and watching others that are the success keys that we've seen? You've got to have some capital. We'll talk about some ideas for how you can do things with not a lot of capital, but really careful use of that capital. It is not the kind of place where you want to just say, oh, let's just spend 50% of our money on marketing out the gate. We've been really, really slow on marketing spend for a lot of reasons, and yet we've built a great, you know, following of customers who love us and spread word of mouth and all kinds of things. And we did it without spending a lot of money on that. I already talked about keeping your customer in mind, and not what you think they want, but what they actually want. And sometimes that can be hard to get your arms around. People, and I'm just going to go back to this. I think this will be the last time I'll talk about this, but I can't say how important it is. Investing in your people, selecting your people, thinking about the skill sets you need. I just joked with somebody that I don't really trust, and I'm over 50 myself, but I don't really trust anybody over 30. We really want to invest in raw talent and people who, and it's not true that I don't trust them, it's just that I really want to hire people who have a lot of raw talent, a lot of energy, and want to learn and want to try to do things at an international standard. And I think that's a really key component of, we have so many team members who have been with us from the early days and have just developed and grown along with us. At the same time, if you are keeping people on board who are not successful, you're hurting them, you're hurting yourselves, and most importantly, you're hurting your great team members because they don't want to work next to somebody who's not performing. For the members of the African diaspora who are listening in, I will just comment about family. And it is very common to hire family in businesses. I would say be extremely careful with that. And we could talk endlessly about that topic as well, but it's something that we've seen hurt a lot of businesses in really big ways and have a lot of broken dreams because of that. So I mentioned never bribing anyone ever, 10 cents, nothing. That is our rule, and that's how we operate. I think it's the only way to operate. I can tell you lots of stories about people we've watched who've just dropped brown bag after brown bag, and they get there no faster than we do. They get there poorer and probably with no one respecting them as well. So I know people will tell you that's the way it happens here. I do not believe that. Of course, it's the law in the US, and that's, you know, you carry a US passport and you're subject to US law. It's also the Bribery Act in the UK and other countries as well. But I think that it's one of those things that I just think is a slippery slope that you don't want to take a single step down ever. Finally, I'll just say, you know, my business partner likes to say, be like water. If you're a river tumbling down and you run into a stone, you don't try and move that stone out of the way. You flow around it. You go over it, you go under it, you go around it. And I think that's really important to doing business, maybe starting any business, but in West Africa, we found that's been kind of a critical key to success. So let's talk about raising capital, because this is a question that people ask us all the time. And, you know, we're raising capital right now because we're doing well and we want to expand faster. I'll give you the shortest answer, which is that it is extremely hard in this market. If you look at a lot of businesses that have gotten big in West Africa, some of them are 60 and 70 years old and they started really small and they just recycled their own capital. Some of them are family businesses. There are cultures, that non-African cultures who have been installed in West Africa for many, many years, for decades, and family money gets passed along from one generation to another. I know a pretty big project that was built, about 9 million euros in Conakry by a private developer, not a penny of bank financing in it, 100% family money. So it's not necessarily because they don't want to take money from banks, but because it's really difficult to do that. You'll hear people talk about the DFIs like OPIC and CDC in the UK. It is a long haul. I'm not saying don't do it, but if your business plan is strictly focused around, oh, OPIC says they're going to give me money, equity, debt, whatever, I would say that you might want to think about a way to get started without that. And maybe down the road, if you're wildly successful, they tend to be happy to pile in. And there's some certain places where they play where you can have some success if you're building a power station or something like that. The last point I'll make about raising capital, or some of the thoughts on that, is if you're borrowing money in one currency, money's available, it's often available in dollars or euros, and your revenue is in Naira. I know this is kind of trite, but it's something to really think hard about. People who are lending money will generally ask this question, but it's a really important point. So what does work in raising money? So I just told you about a lot of the things that are really difficult. You've got your own savings, you've got friends and family, recycling your own profits. I can tell you that a huge chunk of the equity in the business that I'm involved in came from my business partner and I taking little to no salary over the course of like 4 to 5 years. And that is a lot of investment in the company. It's not easy to do, and you need other ways to figure out how to get through life. We're not in so much in that situation now, but that was a lot of our investment capital going in the beginning. That's sweat equity. I will tell you, if you're going to borrow money, debt, you might pay 15%, you might pay 50% on that. If you're going to take equity, you should probably have a story where you can deliver at least 5 times the return of the money that somebody's giving you. So if they're giving you 100,000, you want to give them 500,000 back, or maybe more like $2 million back, because this is a market where people expect those kind of returns. So if you can find money, you're going to know you're going to have to give up something for it. So let's just go through a couple of success stories, and then we'll kind of wrap up and get to questions. I've already told you a lot of this. I told you that, you know, some of our capital came from sweat equity, but we were able to raise friends and family money as well to get us going. And that was really helpful at the beginning, particularly as we're in a, you know, you can see some of those houses there. Those are expensive. There's a lot of concrete in there. There's a lot of steel. There's a lot of supervision, and there's a lot of things it takes to build those houses, and a lot of cost. So we were able to raise some money. Our business, is, I mentioned, is focused on trust. So it's delivering on promises and people believing, and I would tell you, we do deliver, that they can trust us that we're going to deliver on the promise. If you think about the story for the diaspora and for local people in Guinea and Sierra Leone who've tried to build houses, so many times that story is, I sent money there and it disappeared, it was eaten. And when they see us 6 months, 9 months later, delivering them the keys to a beautiful house at a level of quality they didn't think was possible, that trust of, we say we're going to start at this date, we say we're going to finish on this date, we say we're going to do this level of quality, delivering that has been the key to our business. And I think trust is important in a lot of businesses in Africa. Filling in gaps in the ecosystem, I talked about that. There's a lot of things you just can't buy, so you have to figure out how to do them yourselves. Local talent, and it is a long haul, so be prepared for a long haul. Getting going might take a little longer than you think, but I can tell you, once you get going, the momentum can be really fantastic, because we talked about earlier about that lack of competition. There's a reason for that, because it's really hard to get going, but once you get going, you really have the ability, and you can deliver a great product. There is an unbelievably large market for those products. So I want to talk about a very different kind of business now. And another success story is, many of you know that there's lots of mining that goes on throughout West Africa, in, you know, gold mining in Ghana, bauxite in Guinea, and all kinds of things, uranium in Niger. And a lot of the work on mines, a lot of mining is actually what we would call in the US strip mining. It's not deep tunnel mining and that kind of thing like you see in South Africa. And a lot of that work is not done by the mining companies themselves, but it's subcontracted. And so having equipment, bulldozers, excavators, all the kind of equipment you need is usually done by subcontractors. And so, you know, there's a lot of room in that market for people who can manage their equipment and manage their business to be really successful. There's a lot of money to be made there. It can be hard to get in, because sometimes the relationships are what drives who gets the contract. But sometimes you can get in as a tiered subcontractor, and you're a layer down, but you're still, you know, kind of making money. A couple of lessons there, you know, again, recycling profits is important. There's lots, if you can do one thing in West Africa, you're going to be asked to do lots, because people will come to you for all kinds of things. Sometimes those side businesses can be really lucrative. One interesting thing that I learned, and I'm not in the mining business, this is just kind of as an observer, is that it can make a lot more sense to use older equipment where parts are readily available than brand new equipment that you ship over from Europe or the US, where you can't get a part. And maybe it's at a level where somebody doesn't know how to service it. So I think thinking through little questions like that can help you in vetting your idea and your problem, the problem you want to solve. On a completely different side of West Africa, in Lagos, as many of you know, it's a mega city, one of the biggest cities in the world. And there are a lot of wealthy people in Lagos. I don't know this personally, I just have friends there. And my business partner has spoken at a couple of conferences there on African housing and finance. So he's given me some reports, but a friend of mine started a bakery there, and she, Nigerian, but had spent time in the UK and other parts of the world. And she saw this need and is able to really command a premium price for a product that just wasn't very available there. So not easy to buy cupcakes and cakes in Lagos. Now, I know this was 10 years ago. Now there's probably a lot of them. But in this space where there was very little competition and she could command a premium price, there was a lot of profit to be made and a lot of sales to be made. And finding that niche and filling it, much higher profitability than a bakery here in the US, no question about that. I will point out one of the stories she's told me, which is the same that we would say, is getting people to perform at international standards is not easy. When you frost a cupcake and you want it to look like it does at Harrods in London, that is not something that every person, that's not a skill that sits everywhere in Lagos, and a lot of training to get there. So one of the things that I've heard many people from the diaspora tell me is, I'd like to stick my toe in the water, but I'm really comfortable. I work at a bank and I'm really successful here. And at the same time, I want to invest. Well, how can I do that? There are investment opportunities where you can start to get your feet wet without going all the way in. And one point I'll make is that, and I've been asked this several times by people who see that we have a successful operation in Africa, is can you be my representative over there and can you help me? I want to send frozen chicken over there and I live here and I can get access to it and it's a high margin product. But I don't trust anybody there to actually not just steal my product and not give me the money back. Can you do that for me? Well, on the same side, there's a lot of businesses in Africa looking for somebody in the US or in the UK or in France to perform that other side of the service. I can sell chickens if you can send those to me. Again, it requires trust. One of the things that we could suggest is there are businesses like ours that are raising capital, and you can stick your toe in the water by making a small investment in them and then watch how they operate. There's nothing more when you've made an investment in a business, and whether that's a frozen chicken business or a mining business or whatever it is, and you're getting those quarterly investor reports and you're asking the principals how things are going, it's a good way to see if this is something you really want to do and if you really have the stomach for it. And you might want to risk, $20,000 instead of $100,000 and, quitting your job and going all in. The other thing that you do when you do that is vetting those business plans. So looking at somebody else's business plan is a great way to think about your own. So, call somebody who you wants to do something and ask them a lot of questions and see if you can tear it apart and find the flaw. You might find your answer right there. So if you not ready to stick your whole body, you're not ready to dive into the pond, then maybe you just want to put your toe in. Investing in somebody else's business can be a way to do it. So to wrap up, and I think Laura has gotten some questions. I'm seeing a nod, yes. So we've got some questions lined up and I'm going to be excited to take those. There's no question that every challenge there is an opportunity. There are some opportunities that are just, kind of out there, and I'm happy to talk about, ideas and things that we've seen work and not work. It is not an easy market. And if you have this vision that, Africa is China in 2001 and there's just easy money to be made, I don't know that business, but I'd love to hear about it if you find it. It's a difficult market, but the rewards can be fantastic. Don't listen to people who tell you it's not done like that here. Sometimes they're right. Often they just are not looking at things in the same way and they don't see the opportunity that you see. But do listen to your customers. And when I say listen to them, you have to listen a level below what they're saying. Often they'll say, I want this. I have customers who come to me and say, I want a 15-bedroom house with, 35 bathrooms and whatever. And you say, well, so you want a $25 million house? And they say, no, actually, I want a $25,000 house. It's like, okay, I can do a $25,000 house, but let's talk about how to get there. Finally, I'll just say there are ways to dip your toe in the water. If you've been burned before, then look around and look carefully and talk to lots of people. It is an exciting time and it's an exciting market. All across West Africa, there are great things happening. Some of the highest growth countries in the world, Cote d'Ivoire, are in West Africa. And we can talk about the challenge with the Naira and the CD and devaluation and all kinds of things. But it's a great, awesome market. And we need you. There's lots of people trying to do good things there. And we need the diaspora. We need other investors to come in and bring their money, but most importantly, bring their talents. So let me bring Laura back. And do we have some questions?
We do. We have a lot of great questions that have come in. So the first one is, I don't have a lot of money right now. What are examples of some businesses that can be started with a very small amount of startup capital?
Yeah, that is I wish that I had talked about that, because this is a very common thing. Well, I just don't have that much cash. I've been working hard here. I've been sending all my money back. What can I do? I'll give you a couple of examples right now of businesses that I know that have been really successful and started with very little capital. One is a member of the diaspora from the UK, been there for 17 years, had worked in cleaning businesses there, and went back to, in this case, Guinea, and he works for us now and does our final cleaning. And I love talking to him because he talks about how he's brought these new techniques and these new ideas and his own sweat to the job, and how many people come to him and say, I can't find anybody who can clean like you do, whether that's a hotel, whether that's an individual wealthy person who wants their house cleaned. There's this idea of like just pushing dirt around, which you'll see sometimes, and it's just not a Western style of cleaning. And so people who are used to that, he also brings green products, so he's not using harsh chemicals, he's using things that don't off gas. And he has told me many times that he's making more money in Guinea than he ever did in the UK. So that's one. Another one I'll talk about is an architect that we worked with who started in Abidjan 17, 18, 20 years ago, something like that. He started with, a couple $1,000s, and that was basically to feed himself. And he started just doing his own plans, working on little projects, and now he runs the second biggest firm in the country. He's a Westerner. He's an American, but I think he's now an Ivorian citizen as well. And that is his home, and his business is wildly successful. He didn't have a lot of capital, but his capital was up here and he used it. Both of those guys did.
Excellent. Okay, and then we had a couple questions about where we've chosen to work. So the first one is, could you give us the rationale of choosing Guinea and Sierra Leone as opposed to Nigeria and Cameroon, other places that could be more in demand?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about, the market in Nigeria, and Nigeria is a market that we're very interested in and very excited about. So we're hoping to get something started there in the near future. But I can tell you when we wrote this business plan, and this business plan was written 10 plus years ago. It's over 15 years ago. Long before we started, there was a business plan, and the business plan was to do it in Ghana. In 2004. So that would have been a great time to enter the market in Ghana. So the story for us is we went to Guinea because Mamadi Doumbouya, one of our founders, was from Guinea. And he had some land, and he had a good piece of land where we knew he had good title and knew some people. Since then, I cannot tell you the number of people who have told me, if you can do something in Guinea, you can do it anywhere, because it's one of the most difficult markets, not in West Africa, but in the whole world. There's ups, and I could go on and on about the pluses and minuses to operating in a market like Guinea, and Sierra Leone is not that different. It is different, but it's not that different. So we certainly intend to be in Nigeria, Cameroon, maybe as well. We certainly intend to be in Cote d'Ivoire and in Senegal and lots of other markets.
That's a perfect segue, because somebody also asked about that. Another question was about Ivory Coast and expansion into Ivory Coast.
Yeah, it's definitely every market in West Africa is a good potential market for us. We have plans to be in all of the markets there, maybe with a couple of exceptions, but Ivory Coast is definitely on our near-term interest list.
And I would say, if you are interested in finding out like any of our expansion news, I'll put the link in the chat, but you can sign up for our updates and let us know which countries you're interested in. And so when we do expand there, or we have any news, you'll get updates on it. Another question was, how do we go about finding local talent?
Yeah, so I can tell you, I remember Mamadi and I have this very fond memory of, was it September of 2014? Mamadi and I were both in Conakry, and we, over the course, it was a weekend, it was a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We, for like 13 hours a day, we just had people coming through, both subcontractors and potential employees. And we interviewed I don't know how many people, it must have been over 100 people. And some of those subcontractors, I don't know if we hired any people from that group, but we certainly hired some subcontractors who are still with us today. So we were very personal about vetting people. We worked with a service in Guinea that helped us early on with finding people. And I think the most important thing I'll say about people is, I was telling to a diasporan this morning this story about hiring. And one day, this is several years ago, I had flown in and I just arrived at like 6 o'clock at night. And our DG was interviewing someone in the office in Conakry. And I walked in, it was for an engineering position. And we took him, and I just was sitting in on the interview because I had just arrived. And he took him into the bathroom of our office, which is in really bad shape because it's a rental. It's not something we built. And he said, "Can you find the errors here?" And I'll make a long story short, but the guy could not see all the things that were wrong there, whether it was the cracked tile or the plumbing that didn't work right or the toilet seat that was askew or all the things that were wrong. And if a person can't see the problem, they will never be able to fix it. So thinking about your interviewing process and how you select talent is so important.
Yeah, I love that story though. That story is so great as a good way to kind of see where people's heads are at and their abilities and kind of test them out.
Just like the bottom part of that story was, he said that this engineer we were interviewing, who we did not hire, he said something that the DG looked at me and he's like, he doesn't get it, does he? And it was such a great feeling because it meant that our team got it.
Right.
And I think that's, when you get that, cascading that down through an organization, it's a constant everyday battle. And as Wesu, our DG, likes to say, chaque jour ici c'est une formation. Every day here is training. And that's, I think, another thing. You cannot ever stop saying we're not training ourselves every day.
All right, so we had a question around COVID, which is, what challenges have you faced regarding the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think, and it's funny, I was just talking to one of our board members who's a big home builder here in the US, and I was asking about sales, and our sales have actually stood up a little bit better than his. He's in Florida, and he's struggling a little bit with sales right now. So we've certainly seen a slowdown. We haven't had any cancellations, but we've had a few people who've postponed. Totally understandable, mostly about uncertainty. So we've seen a little bit of a slowdown in sales. As I mentioned, we had 2 starts this week, so it's certainly not stopped. The biggest thing that we're concerned about is making sure that our employees and our contractors and all of our partners are safe. So really, we early on, 6 weeks ago, implemented, chlorinated hand wash on site. We put social distancing in place on sites by spreading guys out and taking people's temperatures. A lot of our training from Ebola, we were born in the Ebola crisis. So a lot of that training 6 years ago is really helping us today. But we're expecting things to slow down, but customer payments have been pretty robust. So we feel good that we expect some people are going to have some trouble, and we're working through that. But so far, it hasn't been the total crisis we would have expected. I think that a lot of people view, by the way, that's not my kitchen. This is the kitchen of one of our houses in Guinea that we built. And it's a Zoom photo behind me. A lot of people, this is their dream. And so people don't want to put their dreams on hold. And we're lucky to be in a market where people really care about what they're doing. But my biggest concern is that, kind of a health issue in our team or something like that. So number one concern is avoiding that.
Where do you source your material for the construction? Locally, or is it managed in the US?
So it's a combination. We do a lot of local sourcing. Another enterprise that got started is a guy who did his degree in France, worked in construction in France, and came back to Guinea to start a precast company. There is virtually no precast going on in Guinea right now. And yet a lot of what we do benefits from precast. So for those of you who don't know, precast is just pouring concrete in a factory and pouring concrete members in a factory and then transporting them to site, as opposed to forming them individually on each house. So it makes construction into more of a manufacturing process. So that's an example of local sourcing where we think we can do things better. by sourcing locally. There are some things like, getting certain finished plumbing supplies, electrical fixtures. There are some things that we do with an international supply chain. A lot of our material is imported anyway, so sometimes it's better for us to just control it. But it's a mix. We'd like to get into some more kind of fancy technologies now that we're really established and our brand is great and we're going great guns. But we've been very careful to be respectful of what people's taste is and what they want. The kitchen you look at behind you, those cabinets are manufactured in Sierra Leone, and then we bring them over from Sierra Leone. So that's local manufacture.
Great. So this is a good question, given the deficiency of data in the continent, what is a good way to conduct a market study to find a niche worth exploring?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend who, when I was in grad school and wrote the business plan, this friend of mine is in Nigeria, and he's a very successful business person. And when we were trying to do this business plan in Ghana, and this is in 2004 when the internet wasn't quite what it is today, he came up with all these market statistics and what people could afford. And I just looked at him like, Fulu, how did you do that? And he looked at me and he said, blood, sweat, toil, and tears. And it was so funny. He had grown up in the UK, but he's lived in Nigeria for a long time now, and that is his home. I can't tell you. I mean, he was using a lot of publicly accessible databases. I did recently learn that USAID for American companies does have a program where they will help sponsor market research studies. So if you drop me a note, maybe we can post that afterwards. But I do know that there's a part of USAID that's focused on this now. I would tell you that talking to people is probably the most important thing you can do. And I used to work with a sales guy who said, when you ask a question, you have to ask why 4 times. So, I want a house. Why do you want a house? I want it because my family needs a house. Why does your family need a house? And keep digging until you get to what is the root cause of their challenge. I just can't advertise enough the need to have one-on-one conversations. I've spoken to well over 1,000 individual diasporan and local home buyers to understand what they wanted and why. And we have built our product around that feedback. Not always the first thing they said, but sometimes when you dig down a level and you keep digging down, you start to realize that's what's important. And I don't know that you can outsource that to somebody else.
Great. How do I invest in your company? Is there a minimum?
Yeah, so we do for a brief period of time now. We're closing out an investment round right now, which I think will be our last with private investors. Laura, we can share a link after. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll actually put a link in the chat right now.
Yeah. So we are taking investments as small as $10,000 right now. We decided that we, in particular, wanted to have West African diaspora involved in our business, and so we lowered our minimum to bring in more people. We think that is a really good thing because we want our ownership to look more like the people that we're serving and our clients. And so we're very interested in having diasporans and local Africans as well invested in our future. And we're looking forward to, sharing the profits and the ultimate benefit of the business as we hopefully at some point, make a transaction, list in a public market, sell out, whatever happens to turn my sweat into money too, but your hard-earned money into a good return.
So, and somebody prefaced this question with that they are from Conakry, but they said, how do you deal with the lack of reliability of people in Guinea?
So I believe strongly, and from experience, that the level of talent that exists in Conakry or in Accra or in Abidjan or anywhere in Sigiri or any small town is the same as it is in the US or the UK or anywhere else. You just have to find those people. They are there. There are people who are extremely motivated, extremely intelligent. I tell all of our senior team, if you're not hiring people who are better and smarter than you, you're not doing your job. you should be trying always, and I would say the number one thing is there's a tyranny of low expectations. If you don't set a level of expectation, and I talk about international standards, we talk about this all the time. Anytime somebody says, well, that's the most beautiful house in Conakry, that hurts me. I don't want to be I want to be the most beautiful house in the world, and I want to do it better than anybody anywhere. And I definitely want to leap over those standards, that whether it's built in Switzerland or China or Guinea, we want to be the best. And so setting that expectation is critical. So I understand where the question's coming from, lots of disappointments, and I hear about them all the time. And sometimes it almost breaks me to tears when I listen to the horrible stories and the horrible things that people have had happen to them. But I think if you set your standards high and you are relentless in searching out that talent, and frankly, if somebody is not performing, you have to say, euphemism, send that person to be successful somewhere else. So yeah, I think that's it. Set your expectations high and people will deliver.
Somebody is curious about, is it possible to be your customer while living abroad in a country like Cameroon?
Yeah, absolutely. We have customers. We have in one of our presentations, we have a map of the world with all the places that we have customers. And literally, I mean, there's the colors are all over the place. I mean, we have customers in China, we have customers in Angola, in Uganda, in Ethiopia, so Saudi Arabia. There we have people who have the diaspora. The thing I love about, one of the things I love about this job is working with the diaspora, because they're everywhere and they do everything. I have met diasporans who do every job you can conceive of, from Uber driver to surgeon and everything in between. And anyway, long answer to a short question, we are happy to work with people from anywhere in the world.
Excellent. And also, if you want to see that map, you can find it on our social media. So I encourage you to go scroll through our social media. Somebody had a question. I think they wanted to know a little bit more in depth about expansion. And so they said, looking at your high cost of capital, scaling might be a great challenge for you. How do you plan to overcome this problem and expand into other African countries quickly?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question, and it's a question at startup, and it's a question at expansion, right? When we got started, we went through some money because we had to learn a lot of things. We had to build a first house. We don't build houses on spec, by the way. We did that at the very, very beginning, but we don't build a house until somebody's paid at least a 30% deposit. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it is a different model than you'll see lots of developers take in Africa, and in West Africa in particular. And we think it's important for lots of reasons to do it that way. So when we went into Sierra Leone, we went in with a land partner. And so, you know, we have some really, really awesome, attractive central land in Sierra Leone that we didn't have to spend a lot of capital on to get access to. And so that is a technique. In Nigeria, I think that may be exactly the same route we're going to go, and we'll see how that goes. It is important, you know, now that we have a core team in Guinea, we are starting our construction operations using our Guinean team. We have a couple of people who speak decent English and are going to Sierra Leone. And when you can do that and you can cascade out and use that talent and also present opportunities for people, it is a great way to kind of get started. I just want to say, we do not have a single expat working overseas in Africa for us. Every single member of our team is African, and in Guinea is actually Guinean right now. We have subcontractors from Sierra Leone and some other places, but we've had success with doing that and really relentlessly training them. And now those people are going to be starting operations for us in other parts of West Africa too. So it's not an easy question. You do need more capital. That's a reason why we're raising capital right now, is to expand our balance sheet so that we can do that a little more quickly. But we're also recycling profits now, and we're able to use that.
Okay, what is the ROI in investing in Guinea comparatively to other countries?
That is a fascinating question, and it depends on what business you're in and what you're doing. And I would argue that you could earn a much higher return in Guinea than you could in France in a lot of industries. when you compare Guinea to Sierra Leone, and when you compare Guinea to Cote d'Ivoire, which is a much more advanced economy, there's certainly differences. But if you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you'll find that they're like in the housing sector, there are a lot of developers in Cote d'Ivoire doing what we're doing. In Guinea, there's virtually no one. So that doesn't mean that we're charging really premium prices there, because we still have a market and we have to, price our product to what our customers can afford. But it does mean that it's a different way of approaching things. I think the returns in Guinea can be so much higher because the needs are so much greater, and because in most product lines, there isn't a reliable service provider. And I think that if you can get in there and get started and establish a brand, people will flock to you. I know I do. We flock to the good service providers, and there's just not a lot of them out there. So, the market is wide open in a lot of ways. Maybe a little bit less so in Dakar and a little bit less so in Abidjan, but I think those markets are still pretty open too.
All right, so I know we're pushing about an hour, so I'm going to give you one more question, and then anything else that we didn't answer, either I will type back or we'll be sure to answer them when we send out the email, or people can send us an email too. We'll give you all of our contact information. But the last question that I have here is, do you have any plans to start financing from local banks like EcoBank and start selling to non-diasporans and people in Guinea?
Yes. So we absolutely do. First of all, we do sell to local people in both Sierra Leone and Guinea. We do not have a financing mechanism for them right now. So if you go, one of the great things about markets like Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire is Senegal has BHS and Cote d'Ivoire has BHCI, who do offer some financing mortgage style products. And in Guinea and Sierra Leone, those products just don't exist. I mean, they're kind of mythological in that the banks all talk about them, but it's kind of like, the Loch Ness Monster. People think they've seen it, but it doesn't really exist. So we do have that plan. We are working on plans. We'd love to find a DFI and one of the international organizations that would support us in getting started, where we could do local currency lending in Guinea like we are able to do with our partner US Africa Housing Finance for diaspora buyers. It's a little complicated in Guinea. You can't do a sale in US dollars, so we can't do contracts locally in a foreign currency. We have to do them in Guinea francs, and obviously Guinea franc, like the CD, like the Naira, has its risks. So I think in markets like Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal, that will be available pretty quickly. In Ghana, there's certainly local currency lending. In Nigeria, there's a little tiny bit of it. But it is definitely part of our business plan. When we talk about building 50,000 homes a year, we're not talking about building 50,000 homes a year, $250,000 homes for diasporans. We're talking about building, $50,000, $20,000 homes a year for local people throughout the region. And the only way we're going to get there is to find that financing partner. We've been searching for 5 years, and we're going to keep searching, and eventually we're going to find that right partner.
Okay, sorry. One more thing before we sign off. So just to clarify, if people are interested in investing, is there a minimum investment amount?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if I said it. It's $10,000.
Okay. Well, this has been great. I hope everybody has enjoyed this presentation and this Q&A. So like I said, if anybody has any more questions that, you don't have right now, but you might come up with over the next couple days when you're letting this presentation sort of sink in, please feel free you can either give us a call, our phone number's up there, or you can email us info@africa-housing.com. And as always, please check out and stay tuned to our social media. We post very regularly on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and also we have a YouTube channel where I'm constantly uploading new videos. So for any other information or news that's coming out, stay tuned to there. And hopefully we can do this again soon. This was great, Jonathan. Thank you.
No, and thank you to everybody for joining. I know this is kind of a crazy time, but I'd like to leave you by saying, please, if you've got a dream, go follow it, do it, because the region needs you, and the opportunities are great, and it's risky, and you might not make it, but I will tell you, I think we've made it, and I'm really excited about that. But even if we hadn't, I would have gone to my grave thinking I gave it a shot. And that was more important to me than anything else. This was something I had dreamed about for 25 years before we started. And so it's the kind of thing that I would just encourage everybody else. I know a lot of you have those dreams. Go follow them and go do it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.